spoke about executing the covenant. Having spelled out what can be done and simple things which can be taken, some simple steps that can be taken as part of good governance, as part of reaching out. Will this just go through smoothly? After all, today when some of the agitators are not even listening to their own parents, their agitation level has reached to a point where traditional respect levels have changed. Any attempt by the government, will that just go through smoothly? No. It is naive to imagine that everything will happen as per plan. But that's okay. All those things, all those fears and doubts notwithstanding, the government must act to a plan and make course corrections as it goes along in terms of doing the right thing and all those things which I spoke of. Okay, so what is this element that I'm going to talk about now? I'm going to talk about those who will act as spoilers. I'm using a very soft word. But the spoilers include the terrorists. And they would leave no stone unturned to make sure that all the good intentions and all the good effort of the government is somehow not only prevented but also discredited by even attributing motives to say the government is doing this because they want that. This is the ulterior stuff. And people sometimes get convinced or influenced by this. I mean, there was this great thing about Azadi and so on and so forth. Nobody till today has been able to spell out what exactly is Azadi. I won't get into that. I'm talking about how the whole plan, the covenant can go through without any spoilers putting a spoke in it. This is where I almost look at the part of governance as playing, a double kind of a game, in a sense that against the people it must be as soft as it can possibly be. But against those who have taken up arms against the government, against the people, against the nation, must be dealt with very sternly. And there should be no qualms about it. After all, this is almost waging war against the state. There's nothing short of that. So, while the government plays Dr. Jekyll for the most part, let the Mr. Hyde also go to work and prevent these people and act against them in the strictest possible manner. Because these people are not working in the larger interest of the state, of the people of the state. There are other motivations and there are self-interest involved. In fact, some even foreign interest involved. In fact, quite a lot of foreign interest involved. So therefore, the security forces must definitely do what it takes to prevent this from happening and reduce this disturbance to the minimum level that they can, and they must. Let's talk about the way you're dealing with various types of. Against stone throwing, the police seems to be working on a methodology, and it seems to be working. Again, rather than, it's like we have always said, all of us, when we went through our education, felt that mass punishment was never the right thing. If somebody in the class has done something and he is asked to own up and he doesn't, and the whole class is punished, that's not the right thing. We all know it. So I'm drawing a parallel here. Let's not punish each and everyone simply because some miscreants are the fly in the ointment. It's the security forces which must take out that fly from the ointment and leave only the healing balm behind. That is the attitude that I am suggesting. The armed forces have a duty to perform, and they must. To that extent, I would even say something that hasn't happened in our country, at least visibly to an ordinary citizen like me, is that we don't seem to have an entry and exit policy for security forces. Along the escalation ladder, which begins from normal disturbance of law and order at the local level, could be a fight between two people, and it sort of flares up, and sometimes vested interests take over, and before you know it, it's a major problem. And then you have additional police force coming in, and worse is when you get police flown in from the Central Reserve Police, and so on and so forth. So this is the escalation ladder. As you go up the ladder to seek higher and higher level of security forces involvement, there must also be indicators to suggest that we have now come closer back to normalcy. Maybe this has come down by 2 notches. Then similarly, the involvement of that additional force must also come down by 2 notches. Because this goes all the way up to the involvement of the army or the armed forces. You cannot have the armed forces perpetually deployed for 28 years. There is a difference. I don't want to say this glibly, to say for 28 years the army has been in it. The reason the army has had to be there for many reasons is because of the Pakistan factor. It is not a situation where it is highly localized. And that's where the difference is between the Naxal movement and what is happening in Kashmir. And that is why army is not employed in the Red Corridor. Because that is something that hasn't reached the ladder of escalation to a point where you have to summon the army. We are doing some things right, some things not quite right. Before you go to the next level of enforcement, reinforcement, you must have a certain policy laid down for entry, and similarly for exit. I'm sure if we work that out with certain norms being fulfilled, certain benchmarking, we should be able to de-induct the higher level of troops that you're inducting. From the local police to the additional state police to the Central Reserve Police to the army, all the way up, we must start coming down from the army being de-inducted, thereafter the additional Central Reserve Police forces, Central Paramilitary forces being de-inducted, and so on and so forth, till you come back to this. That's when you can almost proclaim, without saying so, that normalcy has returned. And normalcy is different in different places. X number of accidents in a day in Mumbai are normal. Same number of accidents in a small town would be disaster, would be considered as something grave. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about, normalcy. Normalcy has number of indicators, and all those indicators are well known to you, and I'm sure that you can enumerate them. We apply the same to a given situation and say, to bring it back to normalcy as obtaining in so and so situation, what would it take? And therefore hammer out an entry and exit policy so that we will work to a given schedule, a given set of benchmarks, a given set of objectives towards which the security forces can also work. That we have to bring it down to this level, and thereafter we'll hand it over to the next level of police force. And that's how it must happen. Along the line of control, the army is doing a fine job. Let me assure you that there is no let up in vigilance in terms of domination of that ceasefire, not the ceasefire line anymore, but the line of control. And that is important. During peacetime, domination of the line of control or a border is the most important task of the armed forces or border guarding forces such as the BSF. That domination is doing is being done very well. That is not an area where we need to worry. But give the army a chance. Give the army a chance to say that having attained this level of normalcy, at some point we must go back to our basic job. The same thing the BSF and the CRPF must be able to say. Having brought it down to a level where the state police can handle it, we would like to get back to other duties. That is normal. That is how it must happen. So therefore, where harsh measures are required, they must be taken, and they are important to make sure that the other goodwill generation, the other employment generation, the engagement, the empowerment, all that happens to the betterment of people. Incidentally, while speaking, it suddenly occurred to me that we are in the holy month of Ramzan. That brought back a very important memory, and I thought it is relevant to be mentioned here. Way back in 2002-2003, we were part of a security arrangement in J&K, and we decided that during the month of Ramzan, in fact, I proposed that all the checkposts should be removed, because I thought the people are undergoing a lot of physical discomfort during this period, and perhaps raising or removing of the checkposts would be a good thing to do. It was very heavily opposed by other members of the establishment, but somehow I got everybody to agree to do this for at least a trial period of a short period. Luckily, the duration of that period was not specified. And I must tell you the kind of debate that took place. And I suggested to them that if you look at the success rate of interception in these checkposts earlier, has been almost nil, because people had got so used to these checkposts that nothing, no contraband, no weapons, no illegal stuff would go through those checkposts. So I said, why not pick them up altogether, at least during Ramzan. And once it was done, it had such tremendous effect on the goodwill. Within 24 hours, all the local media, mainly the Urdu press, also the English press, and even the radio, they all were actually responding to this gesture by saying some very, very laudatory and very kind things about the security forces in general and the army in particular. Those who understand Urdu would realize how from the heart it is when somebody says ki aap farishte ho, you're angels of peace. This from a situation which is fraught with all kinds of militant activity was a huge success. And mind you, right through the Ramzan, we didn't have a single incident where large amount of or any kind of trafficking of weapons and equipment and contraband took place along those routes where the checkposts were. So something like this, there is an element of risk always, but the fact is, in the larger interest, this is something that is doable and should be done, in my view. This is the same thing where, in the same spirit and the same sentiment as when I mentioned about releasing of the detainees. I have spelled out my view in some detail. Some of you may disagree, some of you may agree, hopefully, and many of you may well be indifferent. But the fact is, this is something as a citizen of India and as a person who loves Kashmir deeply, I just simply had to say. I've said my piece, the ball is in your court now. Thank you. Jai Hind.